My name is Vexus Thorn, and I am writing these words from a cold stone cell on a world that is not my own. In 3 days my people will end my life. I am not afraid, not anymore. Fear was something I lost on a small blue world called Meridian 3, and what I found in its place was something my species does not have a word for, so I will borrow a human word. I will call it respect. But before I tell you how I came to be here, you must understand who I was. You must understand the Vorlon Dominion, the empire that raised me, trained me, and sent me across the stars to crush a species it considered beneath notice. I was born on Caesarus Prime, the crown world of our empire. My kind stand nearly 9 ft tall. Our scales are thick and hard, the color of deep green stone. We have 2 hearts, 3 rows of teeth, and a memory passed down through blood, so that every young Vorlon knows the taste of every war his ancestors ever fought. We are proud, we are strong, we have conquered 340 worlds across 3 arms of the galaxy, and we have never lost. I grew up believing we never could. My father was a fleet commander. My mother taught combat philosophy at the War Academy. From the moment I could walk on my hind legs, I was told that the galaxy belonged to those who took it, and that the Vorlons had taken more than anyone. I studied tactics. I studied history. I learned the names of 100 fallen species who had tried to resist us and failed. The Jorvani, who begged for mercy at the end. The Kith, who tried to hide in the dark spaces between stars. The Pelari, who offered us their finest treasures and still lost their worlds. None of them lasted, none of them mattered. They were stories we told young warriors to remind them how the galaxy truly worked. When I graduated from the academy at the top of my class, I was given the rank of sub-commander. I was 22 years old by your reckoning, which is still young for my kind, but old enough to lead. I was given a ship. I was given warriors, and then I waited for months for a chance to prove myself. That chance came on a gray morning when I was summoned to the High Council chamber. I walked into that great hall with my head held high and my tail curled behind me in the proper stance of respect. Warlord Kesseth himself sat at the center of the council ring, his old scales dull with age, but his eyes still sharp as blades. He told me there was a new species, a small one, a young one. They called themselves humans. I remember the images they showed me. Soft, pink creatures no taller than a Vorlon child. They had no claws. Their teeth were flat and useless. Their skin was so thin you could see the blood moving underneath it. They lived barely 100 years. They had only recently learned to travel between stars, and even then their ships were slow and their weapons were crude, built on old chemical tricks rather than proper energy science. I laughed when I saw them. I could not help it. The whole council laughed with me. Warlord Kesseth assigned me to the 4th Expeditionary Fleet. Our mission was simple. There was a human colony world called Meridian 3, a small green planet on the edge of their territory. We were to take it, subdue the population, and begin the long process of adding humanity to the list of species that serve the Dominion. The Council did not even classify them as a proper enemy. They marked them as Tier 7, which in our language means soft prey. It is the same classification we give to the grazing beasts on our own home world. I thought it was a great honor. I thought I had been chosen for an easy victory, one that would build my name. Without risking my life, I was wrong about almost every part of that thought. But I did not know it yet. The fleet gathered above Cathar's prime. Over the next 2 weeks, 40 capital ships, 200 smaller vessels, more than 80,000 warriors, all trained, all armored, all carrying the best weapons our forges could produce. I stood on the bridge of my command cruiser and watched them assemble, and my 2 hearts beat together in a slow, steady rhythm of certainty. I remember the night before we left. I sat in my private chamber and recorded a personal log. I still remember what I said into that recorder because the words have haunted me every day since. I said this will be over before my second meal cycle, a shame. I had hoped for a real fight. Then I closed the log, ate a good meal of raw fresh meat, and went to sleep, dreaming of medals and promotions. The jump to the Meridian system took 4 days. During that time I studied everything our scouts had gathered about the humans, their history as best we could understand. It was strange. They had only one home world, a small planet called Earth, third from a yellow sun. They had been using tools for less than 1,000,000 years, which by Vorlon standards made them infants. They had nearly destroyed themselves several times through their own wars, and yet they kept building, kept growing, kept pushing outward. Our scouts noted one thing that puzzled them. Human history was full of wars. Constant wars, war against each other, war against the land, war against the sky, war against the animals on their own world. It was as if they could not stop fighting even when there was no one left to fight. I remember reading that report and thinking it was a sign of their weakness, a species that could not make peace with itself. I thought would never stand against a united empire like ours. I did not understand then what that truly meant. On the 4th day, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Meridian system. The human sun was a small yellow dot ahead of us, and somewhere near it was the colony we had come to take. My bridge crew moved with practiced calm. The navigators plotted our approach. The weapons officers ran their final checks. Everything was as it should be. I stood at the center of my bridge, and I ordered the fleet forward. Our long-range sensors began painting the human defenses. I remember leaning forward in my command chair, eager to see what we were facing. I expected a handful of old satellites, a few poorly armed patrol ships, maybe if the humans were braver than we thought, a single warship trying to hold the line. What I saw instead made me frown. There were ships out there, more than our scouts had reported, smaller than ours, yes, older in their technology. Yes, but they were moving into formation. They were not running. They were not signaling for surrender. They were coming toward us. My first officer, a veteran named Drasuk, spoke from his station in a careful voice. "Sub-Commander," he said, "the human ships are on an intercept course. They are accelerating." I watched the tactical display for a long moment. I counted the human vessels, 31 against our more than 200. And yet they were charging directly into our fleet, into weapons that outranged them, into numbers that should have broken any sane commander's will. For a brief moment, something cold and small moved in my chest. I did not recognize it. I pushed it away. I told Dryzek they were simply delaying Us that they wanted to buy time for the colony to evacuate or hide or prepare. Some last desperate stand that would change nothing. I ordered the fleet to open fire at maximum range. I told my crew this would be a short engagement. The first volleys left our ships in bright lines of light streaking across the dark toward the human formation. And then the humans did something I did not expect. They did not scatter. They did not try to evade. They charged harder, faster, straight through our fire, taking hits that should have destroyed them, losing ships and still pressing on. One of their frigates, already burning, already half broken, did not turn away from our advance. It accelerated until its engines gave out and it slammed into the side of one of our heavy cruisers at full speed. The cruiser was the Varneth, a ship I had served aboard as a cadet. It had a crew of 900. It split in half before my eyes, venting fire and air into the cold dark, and then it was gone. I sat in my command chair and I stared at the empty space where the Varneth had been. My bridge was silent. Even Dryzek, old and hardened as he was, had nothing to say. The humans kept coming, and somewhere deep inside me, beneath all the pride and all the certainty, that small cold feeling grew just a little larger. I did not know it yet, but I had just seen the first real human I would ever meet. I did not know their names. I did not know what they believed or what they loved or what they were willing to give to protect it. I only knew that they had done something no sane species was supposed to do. They had looked at a force that outnumbered them 10 to 1, armed with weapons beyond their understanding, backed by an empire older than their entire written history, and they had decided to fight anyway. That was the moment, though I would not admit it for a long time, that my first battle against humans truly began. And that was the moment I took my first real step toward this prison cell and toward the end that waits for me in 3 days. But before the end, there is so much more to tell, because what happened next on the surface of Meridian 3 was something my people were not ready for, and something I, in all my proud certainty, was about to learn the hard way. For the humans had not even begun to show me what they were. The battle in orbit lasted less than an hour, and when it was over, my fleet had won. On the surface of every tactical display we had won. 29 of the 31 human ships were gone. We had lost only 4 of our own. By every measure the Dominion used to judge a battle, it was a clear victory. But as I stood on my bridge and looked at the numbers, I could not shake the cold feeling inside my chest, because 4 Vorlegend ships had not been lost in centuries of conquest. 4 ships against 31 primitive vessels, flown by a species we had classified as soft prey. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself the true battle was still to come on the ground, where our warriors would crush the colony and take the world. I gave the order to begin the invasion. And somewhere below us on that small green world, the humans were waiting. The sensor officer turned to me with a strange expression on his scaled face. "Subcommander," he said quietly, "we are receiving a transmission from the planet. It is in our language. They must have learned it from our own scouts before they were captured." "Play it," I said. The voice that filled the bridge was soft. It was the voice of a human female, calm and clear, speaking Vorlan with only a slight accent. She did not shout, she did not threaten, she simply spoke. She said, "Welcome to Meridian 3. My name is Elena. You have come a very long way to die here. Please turn around. Go home. We do not want this fight, but if you come down to our world, you will not be going back to yours." Then the transmission ended. My crew waited for me to speak. They waited for me to laugh or to curse or to issue some defiant order, but I did not speak for a long moment because something about that voice had stopped me. There was no fear in it. There was no anger. There was only a terrible, quiet certainty, the kind of certainty I had only ever heard in the voices of the oldest Varlan warlords. I finally spoke. I told my crew to prepare the landing craft. I told them we would begin the ground assault in 6 hours. But as I walked off the bridge to my chamber, the voice of the human female stayed with me. Elena, that was her name, Elena. It was the first human name I ever learned, and as I sat alone in my room before the landing, I did not yet know that it would also be the last one I ever forgot. The landing was the beginning of everything I got wrong. Our assault craft dropped through the clouds of Meridian 3 in perfect formation. 2,000 of them spread across the sky like a dark storm. I rode in the lead vessel, armored in my full combat harness, my personal blade at my hip and my sidearm on my thigh. Around me stood my personal guard, 12 of the finest warriors the Dominion had ever produced. Each of them had fought on at least 3 worlds. Each of them had killed more enemies than I had years of life. I trusted them more than I trusted my own shadow. The plan was simple. We would land in a wide ring around the human capital city called Bridgepoint, and we would close in from all sides. The humans, lacking the numbers and the weapons to defend such a large area, would be forced to either retreat into the city center, where we would trap them, or scatter into the countryside, where we would hunt them down in small groups. It was a plan that had worked on 16 other worlds. It had never failed. The first sign that something was wrong came in the first 5 minutes. As our craft descended toward the landing zones, the air around us began to fill with small metal objects. They were not missiles. They were not energy weapons. They were simple projectiles launched from the ground by what our sensors told us were primitive ballistic weapons. Our armor should have laughed at such attacks. But the humans were not shooting at our armor. They were shooting at our engines, at our sensor domes, at the small precise places where even the thickest Vorlon armor had to leave openings to function. And they were shooting from everywhere, from rooftops, from windows, from holes in the ground, from the branches of trees. There seemed to be no part of the landscape that did not hold a human with a weapon. 3 of my assault craft went down. The first minute, 6 more in the second. By the time we reached the ground, I had lost nearly 100 vessels, nearly 2,000 warriors dead, before they had even set foot on the surface. When my own craft landed with a heavy thud, I pushed through the door with my blade already drawn, expecting to see a battlefield of our making. Instead, I saw the ruins of a small human neighborhood, its buildings scarred by our first bombardment, its streets empty. Empty. There was no one to fight. I turned to Drazik, who had landed with me. "Where are they?" I asked. "Where are they all?" He did not have time to answer. The ground beneath our feet exploded. I do not mean that as a figure of speech. I mean that the humans had buried their own city. They had packed explosives into the streets themselves, into the foundations of the buildings, into the sewers, into every place they thought our warriors might stand. And when the first of our landing craft had set down and our forces had begun to gather, they had set off the charges. The world around me turned into fire and dust and noise. I was thrown into the air. My armor absorbed most of the blast, but when I came back down, I landed hard on broken stone, and when I pulled myself up, half of my personal guard were simply gone. Gone, 12 of the greatest warriors our empire had produced, and 6 of them had been erased in a single moment by a species that did not even have proper energy weapons. I stood in the smoke and I looked around, and for the first time in my life I did not know what to do. Drazik pulled me behind the wreckage of our landing craft. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye. He grabbed my shoulder with a claw that shook just slightly, and he said, "Sub-Commander, we need to move. They are coming." Who? I asked. Who is coming? He pointed through the smoke, moving between the broken buildings. I saw them for the first time. Real humans, not pictures on a screen, not distant silhouettes. Real, living humans moving in small groups, carrying their primitive weapons, coming toward us with the calm patience of predators who had already decided they had won. They were small, smaller than I had imagined. The tallest of them came only to the middle of my chest. Their faces were pale and strange, with round eyes and small mouths and flat teeth. Their bodies were wrapped in fabric and light armor. They should have looked like the soft prey our council had named them. But they did not look like prey. They did not look like anything I had words for. They moved with purpose. They moved with focus. They looked at us the way Varillian warlord looks at an old enemy, not with anger but with quiet, patient calculation. The first firefight of the ground war lasted 3 hours. By the end of it I had lost another 70 warriors. The humans, as far as we could tell, had lost perhaps 15. When the fighting paused and they pulled back into the ruins, it was not because we had pushed them back. It was because they had decided to leave. That was what disturbed me most. They chose when to fight and when to leave. They controlled the entire rhythm of the battle on a world they had lost orbital control of, against a force 20 times their size. By the time night fell on my first day of ground war, I had begun to understand something terrible. The humans were not fighting us the way other species had fought us. They were not trying to defeat our forces in a single great battle. They were not trying to hold territory. They were not even trying to protect their cities. They were trying to make us bleed every step, every hour, every moment of every day. They were trying to teach us that this world would cost us everything we had and more. And they were succeeding. On the 3rd day, we captured our first human alive. He was found in the rubble of a collapsed building, pinned under a broken support beam, his left leg crushed beyond any hope of repair. He should have been dead. He should have been unconscious. But when my warriors pulled the beam aside, he was awake and he was smiling. I went to see him myself. I wanted to understand. He was young, perhaps 25 years old by their reckoning. His hair was short and dark. His uniform was torn and bloodied. One of his arms was clearly broken. His crushed leg had been tied off by his own hand to stop the bleeding. Before we found him, I stood over him in the field medical tent and I spoke through my translator. I asked him his name, I asked him his rank, I asked him why his people were fighting a war they could not win. He looked up at me with pale gray eyes. And he laughed. It was a weak, tired laugh, but it was a real one. Then he said, in his own language, which my translator converted for me, "You came to the wrong rock, lizard." I did not understand the words at first. A rock is a stone. How could a planet be a rock, and why would it matter if we had come to the wrong one? But as I stood there looking at this broken young human who should have been begging for his life, who should have been offering us his secrets in exchange for mercy, who should have been doing anything other than smiling up at the warlord who had invaded his world, I began to understand. He was not smiling because he was happy. He was smiling because he knew something I did not. He was smiling because he knew that whatever happened to him, his people would not stop. His death would not matter. His capture would not matter. The loss of his city, his colony, his entire world would not matter, because there were more humans. There were always more humans, and every one of them in his eyes would be willing to do exactly what he was doing now. I left the tent that night and I walked to a small rise outside our camp. I stood there in the cold wind and I looked up at the stars, and for the first time since I had been a very young child, I felt a thing I had no name for. I felt small. The stars above Meridian 3 were the same stars that shone over Kesaris Prime, the same stars my father had navigated by, the same stars my mother had taught me to find in the sky when I was no taller than her knee. They had always felt like the lights of a great city that belonged to us, that my people had claimed and would always hold. But that night they felt different. They felt like the eyes of something old and patient, watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I stood there for a long time and I thought about the young human in the medical tent. I thought about his smile. I thought about what he had said. The wrong rock, I whispered to myself. In the dark, the wrong rock. And somewhere in the back of my mind, that small cold feeling I had first felt in orbit was beginning to grow into something much larger. Something I would soon have to give a name to, whether I wanted to or not. I returned to my command post as the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. 3 weeks of war still lay ahead of me, and I did not yet know how many more lessons the humans had to teach. But I was beginning to suspect that I had not come to conquer a world. I had come to wake something up. The days that followed blurred together into one long storm of fire and confusion. By the end of the first week, my fleet had landed nearly 40,000 warriors on Meridian 3. By the end of the second week, I had fewer than 22,000 still able to fight. I had never seen numbers like that. I had studied every major battle in Voral history, and none of them, not even the Great Siege of Jorvan Prime, had ever taken losses at this speed. But it was not the numbers that broke my certainty. It was the small things. It was the way the humans fought. On the 8th day, I received a report from one of my field commanders that made me read it 3 times to be sure I understood it. A small group of our warriors had been pinned down in the basement of a ruined school. They were surrounded. They were low on power cells. They had been fighting for nearly 2 days without sleep, and then suddenly the human fire had stopped. A single human had walked out of the rubble with her hands empty. She had a Red cross painted on the white band. Around her arm, she had spoken through broken translator, and she had told our warriors that she was a medic and that she was coming in to help the wounded. Our wounded. She walked into that basement alone, unarmed, surrounded by enemies who had been trying to kill her people for more than a week. She tended to 6 wounded Voral and warriors. She set their broken bones. She treated their burns. She gave them clean water. She saved the life of at least 2 who would have died without her. And when she was finished, she simply stood up, nodded to the officer in charge, and walked back out into the ruins. No one shot at her. Our warriors were too stunned. Our own doctrine did not include such a thing. We did not tend to enemy wounded. We did not have a concept of a medic who crossed the line. When we were taught about healers in the academy, we were taught that they served their own and only their own, and that any healer who went to the enemy was a traitor to be put down at once. But this human had walked in, saved our warriors, and walked out, and she had done it because in her eyes, the moment we had stopped fighting, we had stopped being enemies. We had simply become wounded. I read the report 3 times, and then I sat in my chair and I did not move for a long time. It was not weakness, that was what confused me. A weak species would not walk into an enemy camp unarmed. A weak species would not save the lives of the very warriors who had come to conquer their world. That took something else, something I did not yet understand. On the 10th day, it happened again in a different way. One of our scout teams had captured a human pilot whose small fighter craft had been shot down in a forest to the east of the capital. She was badly wounded, and our warriors had expected her to die before they could bring her in for questioning, but she lived. She was stubborn. She held on. When they began to question her, she would not speak. She would not give them her name, her rank, her unit, or any information at all. And GT snorts. And GT. They used every method the Dominion allowed. She said nothing. Then one of our officers made the mistake of mentioning in front of her that the building she had tried to bomb during her final flight had been a human hospital, and that he believed she had failed on purpose to avoid killing the patients inside. The pilot looked up at him and she spoke. For the first time, she said, "Of course. I missed on purpose. There were children in that building." The officer asked her why that mattered. The building had been a legitimate military target. A proper warrior would have destroyed it regardless. The pilot dying, bleeding, surrounded by enemies who had already decided her fate, looked the officer in his eyes and said, "Because I am not a proper warrior. I am a human being, and we do not kill children, not even to win." Then she closed her eyes and she did not open them again. The officer who had questioned her sent me a personal message that night. He was a hardened veteran, a warrior of 30 years. He had fought on 8 worlds. He had done things in the name of the Dominion that most of our species would not speak of in public. His message was only 3 lines long. "Sub-Commander," he wrote, "I do not think we understand what we are fighting. I request permission to withdraw from questioning duty. I need time to think." I granted his request. I did not know what else to do. That night I sat in my command tent with a map of the continent spread out before me, and I tried to understand the shape of the war I was losing. because I was losing. I had not admitted it yet, not even to myself, but the numbers did not lie. We had taken only 12% of the planet. We held the orbital lanes, but we could not resupply our ground forces quickly enough to replace our losses. The human counterattacks came in waves, not as one great army, but as 1,000 small wounds, each one small enough to survive, all of them together slowly bleeding my fleet to death. And every day reports came in of things like the medic and the pilot and the young man in the tent with his leg crushed. Every day my warriors came back with stories that did not fit our doctrine. A human child, no more than 10 years old, had stepped in front of a Vorlon warrior to stop him from shooting her grandmother. The warrior, one of our best, had lowered his weapon and walked away. When his commander asked him why, he said, because she looked at me like I was the monster in her bedtime story, and I did not want to be that monster anymore. A human elder, a man of perhaps 70 years, had surrendered peacefully to our forces and had been taken to a holding area. When the guards checked on him that night, he was gone, but 6 of our wounded prisoners, humans who had been captured in earlier fighting, were also gone. The old man had freed them and slipped away into the city somehow without being seen. He had come in on purpose to rescue them. He had surrendered on purpose to get close. A human soldier, surrounded and out of ammunition, had waited until a Vorlon squad came close, and then he had used himself as a weapon in a way that killed the squad and saved the civilians he had been protecting. He had left a note pinned to his chest. The note said only 4 words: tell my daughter sorry. Every report, every day, more stories I could not explain. And then on the 15th day, our scouts brought back a captured document. It was not a military plan. It was not a code book. It was a simple record written in the human language that had been left behind in a school we had overrun. It was a history book. One of our translators worked through the night to read it, and in the morning he brought his findings to me. His face was strange. His scales were pale. Sub-Commander, he said, I think we need to talk about Earth. I let him speak, and as he spoke, everything I thought I knew about the humans fell apart. Earth, he told me, was not a peaceful cradle of a young species. Earth was a death world. The planet that had given birth to humanity had more large predators per square unit of land than any world we had ever charted. It had creatures with claws, creatures with teeth, creatures with poison, creatures that hunted in packs, creatures that hunted alone. It had weather that killed. It had plants that killed. It had diseases that killed. It had oceans full of things that killed. It had mountains that killed. And into this world, millions of years ago, had come a small soft creature with no claws and no fangs and thin skin. And that creature had not only survived, it had conquered. Humans, my translator explained, had a trait that was almost unique among the species we had encountered. They were persistent predators. When they wanted to hunt something, they did not ambush it. They did not overpower it. They simply followed it for hours, for days. They would run after their prey until the prey collapsed from exhaustion, and then they would take it. Their bodies, soft and weak as they seemed, were built to outlast almost any other living thing on their home world. But that was only the beginning. Humans had also done something else. They had formed packs, not small packs of a dozen, or so like many predators, vast packs. Packs of hundreds, then thousands, then millions. And those packs had cared for each other in ways that had no parallel. In our own history, a Vorlegen mother will care for her young until they can hunt. After that, they are on their own. A human mother will care for her young for 20 years and then continue to care for them for the rest of her life. A Vorlegen warrior who is too wounded to fight is left behind. According to our oldest traditions, human wounded is carried home even if the carrying risks more lives. The translator read from the book. He read about human wars, and there were thousands of them. He read about human disasters, floods and fires and sicknesses that had killed millions. He read about times when humans had fought each other with weapons terrible enough to end all life on their own world. And every time, every single time the humans had survived, they had rebuilt. They had come back harder and stronger and more determined. I listened to him for hours, and when he was finished, I understood something that made my two hearts grow cold. The Dominion had not discovered a young species. The Dominion had not found soft prey. The Dominion had walked into the hunting grounds of the oldest survivors in the galaxy, a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to not die against a world that had tried everything to kill it. And we had decided to add ourselves to the long list of things that had tried. That night, Warlord Kesseth himself arrived at our command post. He had come down from the fleet to take personal command of the ground war. He was old and scarred, and he did not believe in the reports I was sending up to orbit. He thought I was weak. He thought I was making excuses for my losses. He listened to me for 10 minutes. Then he slammed his claw on the map table and he said, "Enough. If the humans will not break, we will break their world." He gave the order for full orbital bombardment of the human cities we had not yet taken. He did not wait for council approval. He did not consult the other commanders. He simply gave the order, and the fleet above us began to prepare. I wanted to stop him. I should have stopped him, but I was still a sub-commander, and he was a warlord, and in our empire, warlords do not take counsel from their juniors. The bombardment was scheduled for dawn, but dawn never came for Warlord Kesseth, because that night the humans did something no one, not one of us, had ever thought possible. They captured 3 of our supply shuttles in a small raid on our outer perimeter. They did not destroy them. They did not even damage them. They simply took them very quietly and they flew them up into orbit using their cargo codes and their transponder signals, because our own scouts had made the mistake of landing at human airfields in the early days, and the humans had watched and learned and copied. The shuttles approached the flagship at dawn. They were cleared to dock. They were waved through every security check, and when they reached the flagship's main bay, they detonated all 3 of them at once. Full cargo, loads of captured Vorlag explosives, stolen from our own supply lines and repurposed by human hands. The flagship did not survive the blast. Warlord Kesseth did not survive. Nearly 4,000 warriors on that ship did not survive. The bombardment order was never given because there was no longer a command structure in orbit to give it. And I, Sub-Commander Vexus Thorn, 22 years old by your reckoning, found myself standing in a command tent on a world that was killing me, looking at a fleet in disarray and realizing that I was now the senior officer alive. I was in command. I had never wanted it. I had never asked for it. I had dreamed of a quick victory and a medal to hang above my father's hearth. Instead, I had a shattered fleet, 20,000 warriors who could not be resupplied, a dead warlord and an enemy who had just taught me that no ship, no formation, no battle plan was safe from their minds. I sat down on a camp stool and I put my head in my claws, and for a moment, for just a moment, I understood something. I understood the smile on the face of the young man in the medical tent. I understood the quiet voice of the woman named Elena in the transmission. I understood why the humans fought the way they did, why they died the way they did, why they refused to stop the way they did. It was not because they were brave, or rather, it was not only because they were brave. It was because they had been doing this their whole lives against their own world, against their own history, against every predator and every disease, and every disaster and every neighbor who had ever tried to end them. They had been doing this so long that they had forgotten how to lose. And now we had come along and asked them to remember. I lifted my head. I gave orders to my remaining commanders. I told them we would hold our position. We would not advance. We would not retreat. I told them we would wait for new orders from home. But even as I spoke, I knew that no orders from home would change what was coming, because the humans were not done with us yet. And somewhere out in the ruined city, a small woman named Elena was already planning the next step. The next step came 6 days later, and it was aimed at me. After the flagship was destroyed, what remained of my fleet pulled back into a tight defensive formation. On the surface, my forces dug in. We built walls, we set traps, we tried to create a position that even the humans could not break. We held the great valley east of the capital, a natural bowl of rock and forest that should have been impossible to attack from the open ground. The humans did not attack from the open ground. They attacked from under it. For weeks, without our knowing, they had been digging tunnels, old mining shafts, sewer lines from the capital, drainage channels from the farmlands. They had worked in small teams in the dark, hauling out dirt by hand, moving it in buckets and sacks, hiding their work from our sensors with nothing more than old metal sheets and layers of stone. And one morning, just after the sun had risen, the ground inside our fortifications opened up in 100 places at once, and humans came pouring out. I was in my command tent when it began. I heard the shouting first, then the sound of their weapons, the sharp, fast crack of human rifles mixing with the deeper hum of our own guns. I grabbed my blade, pulled on my harness, and ran out into the morning light. The scene was chaos. Humans were everywhere, inside our walls, behind our lines, running between our tents. They had brought the battle into the heart of my camp, and they had brought it so fast that our defenses were useless. All our walls faced outward, all our traps were aimed at the open ground, and the enemy was already inside. I ordered my guard to follow me. We pushed toward the center of the camp, trying to reach the communications post to call the fleet for support, but humans had already taken the communications post. We could see them inside, setting charges, cutting wires, preparing to destroy it. Drzik, who was still at my side, grabbed my arm. "Sub-Commander," he said, "we have to fall back. We have to reach the evacuation point." I looked at him. I looked at my warriors, scattered and confused, trying to fight an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. I looked at the sky where our shuttles should have been coming down to help us, but where instead I could see human-made smoke trails rising from the edges of the valley, smoke from anti-aircraft positions I did not know they had built. We were trapped. I had led my warriors into a trap, and the humans had closed it around us. I made a decision then. It was not a brave decision. It was the decision of a young commander who had finally understood what kind of enemy he was facing. I told Drzik to take what warriors he could gather and fall back to the evacuation point. I told him to save as many as possible to get them to the shuttles, to get the shuttles into orbit. And I told him I was going forward with my personal guard to slow the human advance, to buy them time. He looked at me for a long moment. He was older than me. He had fought for many more years. He knew what I was asking. He nodded. He saluted me in the old Varillian way, claw over heart, and then he turned and ran to gather the warriors who could still be saved. I took what remained of my personal guard, 5 warriors in all, and I moved toward the fighting. We pushed into the ruins of what had been a small settlement inside our fortifications. The humans had taken cover there, using the broken walls of old buildings to ambush our forces as they passed. We hit them from the side, and for a short time we were winning. My warriors were the best the Dominion had. Even in a losing war, they were a force to be reckoned with. But the humans kept coming, more of them, from every direction. They seemed to grow out of the very stones. One by one my guard fell. Ren, who had served my family for 2 generations, went down first. A human with a small grenade caught him in the open. Vass, the young warrior I had trained myself, went next. He died defending my left flank. Then Korn, then Sethier, then finally old Meketh, who had taught me my first blade lessons when I was a hatchling. He took 3 bullets protecting my back, and still stood long enough to take down the human who had shot him before he fell. I was alone. I was bleeding from 6 wounds. My armor was cracked in a dozen places. My blade was dull with use. My power cells were nearly empty, and I was alone in a ruined human settlement surrounded by enemies I could no longer count. I stumbled through the broken streets, looking for a defensible position, looking for anywhere I could make a final stand. I found what had once been a school. I knew it was a school because the walls, though broken, still had pictures on them, pictures drawn by children. Small human figures, bright colored. Suns, houses with smoke coming out of chimneys, the kinds of pictures any young creature of any species might draw. I stepped inside and I leaned against the wall and I tried to catch my breath. That was when I saw her. She was standing at the far end of the room near a broken window, and she had a rifle aimed at my chest. She was small, smaller than I had expected. Even among humans, she could not have been more than 5 and 1/2 ft tall. She had short dark hair and dark eyes and a scar across her left cheek. Her uniform was torn. She was bleeding from her shoulder and from her side. She looked as tired as I felt. She did not fire. I did not raise my weapon. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other across that broken room full of children's drawings. Then she lowered her rifle just slightly and she spoke to me in rough. "Vor Allen, you are the commander," she said. "I have been hunting you all morning." I looked at her and I understood. She was alone too. She had come here alone on purpose to find me. She had separated from her own unit to do it. She had tracked me through the fighting, following the trail of my guards' attempts to protect me, and she had come to this school to end this one way or the other. I asked her name. She told me. "Elena Vasquez," she said. "Corporal, 1st Marine Division of the Meridian Colonial Defense Force." Elena. It was the name from the transmission. The first human name I had ever learned. The woman who had told my fleet in that quiet voice that if we came down to her world, we would not be going back to ours. I almost laughed. I asked her why she had come alone. I asked her why she had not brought her unit when they could have ended me easily. She looked at me and she said something I have thought about every single day. "Zinta," she said, "because my people do not need me to end you. My people will end you. Whether I am here or not, I came because I wanted to see your face. I wanted to see the face of the man who looked at our world and thought we were soft." I stared at her, and then very slowly she raised her rifle again. What followed was the longest fight of my life, though measured in time it lasted only 11 minutes. She was small, she was wounded, she had almost no weapons left. I was twice her size, armored, carrying a blade and a sidearm. By any measure of physical combat, I should have ended her in seconds. But she fought me for 11 minutes. She used the school, the broken chairs, the pieces of glass, the rebar from the fallen ceiling. She used everything. When my blade came down, she was not there. When my sidearm fired, she had already moved. When I grabbed her, she twisted away in ways my body could not follow. She broke my left wrist with a length of pipe. She cut the tendons behind my right knee with a shard of glass. She cracked my visor with her own head, a blow so hard that she staggered back, with blood pouring from her scalp, and still came forward again with a piece of wood in her hand. By the end of it, I was on my knees, and she was on her back, and neither of us could stand. I had my blade at her throat. She had a piece of broken pipe pressed against the soft spot under my jaw, where my armor did not cover. We were each one motion away from ending the other. We both stopped moving. I looked down at her, she looked up at me. We were both breathing hard. We were both bleeding. We were both, I think, beyond fear. I asked her through my damaged translator, why? Why do you fight? Why do you fight like this? You have lost. Your colony is broken. Your city is ruined. Even if you end me, another will come. You cannot win. She looked up at me and she smiled. It was not a bright smile. It was not a happy one. It was tired and sad and calm. And it held something I still cannot name. She said, "We never lose." I asked her how that was possible. And she said, "We just run out of time. And someone always comes next." I did not move. I did not strike. I could have, she could have, neither of us did. Because in that moment, something had happened between us that I still do not have the words for. Something that was not friendship and was not mercy and was not even respect exactly. It was Something older, something deeper. 2. Warriors at the end of their strength, looking at each other and recognizing each other not as enemies but as the same thing, as the same thing. Then the doors of the school broke open, and her people came in. They filled the room, dozens of them. They saw her on the floor and they saw me above her with my blade, and I could see in their eyes what was about to happen. But Elena raised her hand, just her hand, a small weak motion. She said, "Wait." They waited. She looked at me and she said, "Put down the blade, put it down, and we will not kill you." I looked at her for a long moment, and then, for reasons I could not have explained at the time, I obeyed. I put down my blade. I laid it on the broken floor beside her, and I raised my hands and I surrendered. The humans came forward and took me. They were not gentle, but they were not cruel. They tied my hands with strong cord. They put a cloth over my wounds. They carried me out of the school, past the ruins of my own command post, past the bodies of my warriors, past the broken walls of everything I had brought to this world. As they carried me away, I looked back. Elena was being lifted onto a stretcher by two of her own. Her eyes met mine. Across the ruins, she raised one hand just slightly, and she held it up. I did not know the meaning of the gesture then. I would later learn it was something humans do to say goodbye, or to say thank you, or sometimes to say both at once. I was taken to a human holding area. For 3 weeks I was a prisoner. They treated me better than I deserved. They fed me. They healed my wounds. They asked me questions, but they did not hurt me. Elena visited me twice. We did not speak, we just looked at each other through the clear wall of my cell, and I think we both understood that there was nothing left to say, and nothing still needed to be said. On the day I was released back to my people as part of a strange exchange that the humans had arranged, Elena came to see me one last time. She stood on the far side of the holding area. She did not come close. She simply said, "Goodbye, Commander. Someone always comes next. I hope the next one you meet teaches you something too." Then she walked away. I never saw her again. The Dominion lost the war. I do not mean only the war for Meridian 3, though we lost that completely. I mean the larger war, the real one, the one I had not even known we were fighting. When the remains of my fleet limped home, dragging less than a third of what we had set out with, the Council wanted answers. They wanted reports. They wanted to know how their greatest military venture in a generation had turned into a disaster. They wanted to know how Tier 7 soft prey had broken a fleet that had crushed empires. I gave them my report. I told them everything. I told them about Aliana and about the medic who had walked unarmed into our basement, and about the young man in the tent who had laughed through his wounds. I told them about the tunnels and the captured shuttles and the 11 minutes in the school. I told them about Earth and what it had made the humans into. I told them we could not win, that if we fought humanity with everything we had, they would simply keep coming, that we would run out of warriors before they ran out of people who were willing to stand in front of us, that we would run out of worlds before they ran out of reasons to take them from us, that in the end the galaxy would remember this as the war in which the Vorlon Dominion met something older and harder than itself and did not survive the meeting. The Council did not want to hear it. They called me a coward, they called me a traitor, they said that my weakness in the school, my surrender, my willingness to be taken alive was proof that the humans had turned me. They said that any warrior who could have put down his blade to a wounded enemy female had lost his place among the Vorlon people. They put me on trial. The trial lasted 2 days. There was no true defense. There was no true judgment. It was a ceremony meant to hide a decision that had been made. Before I ever entered the room, they found me guilty of dishonor. They sentenced me to death. I was not surprised. I was not even angry. I was taken to this cell. In 3 days, I will be taken out of it, and my people will end my life in the old way, with a blade in the sand ring where Vorlag and traitors have been ended for 1,000 years. I am not afraid. I spent many nights in this cell trying to understand why I was not afraid, and I believe I finally do understand. It is because of Elena. Because of a small woman with a scar on her cheek who fought me for 11 minutes in a ruined school and then told me to put down my blade. Because of the smile she gave me when I asked her why her people fought. Because of what she said to me. She said we never lose, we just run out of time and someone always comes next. I have thought about those words every day. At first I thought she meant that humanity would always send more warriors, that behind every human who fell another would stand up, that the war could go on forever because the supply of willing humans could not be broken. But that was not what she meant, not really. What she meant, I think, was something larger, something I had to learn slowly in this cell in the dark over many nights. She meant that her people did not measure life the way we do. We measure a life by what it conquers, by what it takes, by the weight of its victories. Vorlag warrior who dies having taken 3 worlds is considered great. Vorlag warrior who dies having taken none is considered a failure. Humans do not measure life that way. Humans measure a life by what it stands up for, by what it refuses to let fall. Elena was not trying to win the war. That school, she was not trying to win the war when she hunted me through the ruins. She was not even trying to survive. She was trying to be a link in a chain that stretched back into her own history, back through every human who had ever stood against something larger than themselves and refused to move. A chain that stretched forward into a future she would probably not live to see, a future full of humans who would hear her name or the names of the thousands like her, and who would take the next step in the long human walk across the stars. She did not need to win, she only needed to hold her place in the chain, and as long as she held it, the chain would hold, and as long as the chain held, humanity would move forward. That is why they are unbeatable. That is what my people never understood. You cannot defeat a species that measures itself by the length of the chain, because every link you break only makes the next link hold tighter. We thought we were hunting prey. We were actually being measured against a standard that we could never meet by people who had been building that standard for 1,000,000 years. And we came up short. There is one last thing I want to say before I finish this recording. When I stood over Elena in that school, with my blade at her throat, I could have ended her. I was stronger, I was faster, even wounded. I could have done it in a single motion before her people came through the doors. I did not. I have asked myself 1,000 times why. I did not. I used to think it was weakness. The council certainly did. My people will die believing it was weakness. But I have come to understand that it was not weakness. It was the first brave thing I had ever done. All my life I had been told that courage was taking lives, taking worlds, taking the things that other species held dear and adding them to the collection of the dominion. That was what a Vorlon warrior was. That was what I had been trained to be. But in that moment, in that ruined school with a wounded human woman under my blade, I did something no one had ever taught me to do. I chose not to take. I chose to see her as something more than prey, to see her as something that had earned the right to keep breathing, whatever the cost to my own fate, whatever my counsel might later say, whatever the cost to my own life. I put down my blade. It was the first true act of courage in my life, and it was also, I think, my last, because everything that has happened since my capture, my surrender, my trial, my approaching end, has only been the working out of that one choice. My people believe I am dying a coward's death. They believe I broke. I know better. I am dying because in one moment, in one small room, I looked at another being, and I decided that she was more than what my people had told me she was. I am dying because I refused to add Elena's name to the list of lives the Dominion had ended. I am dying because I let one link in the long human chain hold. And if her chain holds, then perhaps in some strange way, I am part of it now. 2. That is my last thought. That is my last gift to anyone who hears this recording, to anyone who finds this message, to anyone who wonders what happened to the young Vorlon subcommander who was sent to conquer a small green world and who came back broken. I have one thing to say. The humans are coming. Not as conquerors, not as warriors, not even as enemies, unless you make them into enemies. They are coming the way they have always come to every new place, slowly, stubbornly carrying their children and old ones and their strange, strong idea that no link in their chain is allowed to break. If you meet them, do not make my mistake. Do not see them as small. Do snorts not see them as soft. Do not count them by their numbers or their weapons or their years. Count them by the length of the chain. Count them by the names of those who came before, and by the faces of those who will come after. Count them by the quiet voice of a woman named Elena speaking across the stars, telling you that if you come to her world, you will not be going home to yours. Then if you are wise, turn your ships around, go home, hold your own chain. Let them hold theirs, meet them as neighbors, not as prey, meet them as fellow travelers in a very large and very old galaxy. They will meet you the same way. They are better at that than we ever knew. I can hear the guards outside my cell. Now they are coming for me. I am ready. My name is Vexus Thorn. I was a sub-commander of the Vorlag Dominion. I led a fleet against a species called humans, and I lost. I was defeated not by their ships or their weapons, but by single woman in a ruined school who showed me in 11 minutes what my entire empire had never taught me in 100 years. My first battle against humans taught me how to fight. My last moment of courage is this, admitting that they taught me how to live. Remember Elena. Remember the chain. And if you ever look up into the stars and see a small, bright ship coming towards you, one that does not run and does not turn away, one that carries a species you have never met but somehow already know, do not raise your weapons. Raise your hand instead. The way she raised hers to me across a ruined room at the end of a long and terrible day. They will understand. They always do. This is Sub-Commander Vexus Thorn, signing off for the last time. The sun is coming up outside my cell. It is a good day to be brave. It is a good day to put down the blade. Goodbye.